And welcome back to the Knights of Columbus. It's the 132nd Supreme Convention from Orlando, Florida. I'm Doug Keck. I'm pleased to be joined by Carl Anderson. He's the Supreme Knight for the Knights of Columbus. And we just saw that wonderful presentation you just went through. And, you know, I'm so used to doing book shows, and we actually got to do your book one time in the past. But this annual report of the Supreme Knight, it might as well be a book interview we're going to do here. There's just so much in here that the Knights of Columbus do. And my fear on one level, and I hope this show helps, people don't know about it, do they?
Well, we have more than 1.8 million members, and when so many of them are active, the good works accumulate, so there's a lot to talk about.
Right, and I know one of the things that really touches my heart at the work, it's all about charity. And I know you did with the Special Olympics. I have a special needs son who's autistic. I remember in your book, when we interviewed years ago, there was a girl in a wheelchair who I know touched you specifically in that particular book. So that's very close to your heart as well, isn't it?
Well, I think what's special about Knights of Columbus charity is that it's not just writing a check. Of course, money's important, but it's a personal giving of one another to somebody that's hurting or somebody in need in some way. And that really builds a bond when you see how what you're doing actually changes somebody's life for the better. It's so dramatic. And I think that's what, for example, Pope Francis is calling us to get personally involved, to touch that person. And because of that, there's an exchange of gifts. And I think oftentimes the person we help has so much courage, faith to deal with the adversity that they're in. It really helps us quite a bit. So
right. It really is that we get more than we receive by giving, and you see that. But one of the things that's interesting too was the idea of having it here in Florida. I know you pick it out multiple years ahead, but you have that whole idea with our present Holy Father and also the other bishops in the United States talking about we have to remember our Catholic heritage here in the United States. I think you had a great line there about how we were one nation, we were one country or a hemisphere under God before we were one nation under God.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we forget sometimes just how much Catholics began and explored and developed this country. And Florida is a wonderful example of this. The early Spanish missionaries, Ponce de Leon, and the others who followed him. And then throughout the French missionaries, the Southwest, down the Mississippi, states like Maryland that were founded by Catholics. So there's a rich heritage there. We've got to recall it.
Right, that's interesting. And even the point you made about the name of Florida. I mean, I always heard it was, Spanish for flowers. I never heard the Easter connection like that you pointed out.
Yeah, Pascua Florida is a term for Easter.
Right. And I think it's next year, next September, it's going to be, the anniversary of St. Augustine being founded, I think basically, so, I don't know, it's 250 years.
So there's a lot. I mean, we talk about, Corpus Christi or Santa Fe or Los Angeles or San Francisco, we don't think, right? Catholic missionaries.
Especially when we hear San Francisco these days, unfortunately, sometimes we worry about that. But I see also what's fabulous too, your support for pro-life. The wonderful work in pro-life, and now with the March for Life, even more so than before, plus supporting in Canada and also the Walk for Life West Coast, which we've had the great honor of participating in and hoping to get it out. And again, it seems to be like something like this, having the Knights get involved with all the kinds of media, really being on the cutting edge. You've got a news service, you're on the web, you've got all that ways of getting that information out. And then one of the ways, in addition, is working with us and hopefully getting this out through Salt and Light and Catholic TV, but also with the news show with Brian and what we're doing at EWTN News Nightly. And I know that was something that was personally very much to your heart of what needed to happen. Why is that?
Well, because, so often, news that Catholics need to know gets filtered through secular media with some natural bias. And so we need a news channel, we need an information channel that goes directly to Catholics without filtering it through a secular, if I may say, bias that doesn't necessarily give us as Catholics the news we need to know. So this is a tremendous initiative of EWTN, moving it beyond the programming, the catechetical programming that's so important for Catholics, but every day now there's a source from a Catholic perspective of the news. And I think over time it'll be very important, because coming from Washington, the public policy makers in Washington will begin to think, well, there's a Catholic audience here.
Okay.
Right? There's a Catholic audience here, and maybe we better take into account what they're thinking.
Right. That's a good point. So not only in retrospect to what's going on, but maybe proactively in how people are making decisions and realizing this information is going to get out. Yeah. There's an audience out there that's going to hear it the true way, as opposed to the way we've been getting it spun.
Yeah, and I find watching News Nightly to be very important, because you get expertise and Catholic expertise on subjects that the secular media doesn't give you. So the plight of Christians in the Middle East now, in Syria and Iraq, very important. When we have different social issues like the HHS mandate, to get that Catholic perspective, why it's so important in terms of conscience. They're stories that you're not getting at other channels.
Well, it's great too, because in a sense it's like with the Knights of Columbus, as being someone, like you said, it's not left and right, it's kind of up and down, that idea. In some ways I was thinking it seems like we're trying to get back up to where we used to sort of be in some ways. But the idea that someone can come and watch that news show and get a straight idea, an unbiased idea of what the church's perspective about this, not necessarily the conservative person's perspective on what might be said, or the liberal perspective, but actually taking into account the balance that is there in the church, the caring for the fundamental option for the poor, as well as the doctrinal underpinnings of the defense of marriage, etc.
No, I think that's very important, because what happens in Washington especially, but you see it in almost all the news shows, you have reporters who are either on one side or the other political spectrum, and they view the news through that spectrum. And Christianity and the gospel stands outside of that. And really what we ought to be doing is judging left or right based on gospel principles, not judging the gospel based on left or right, if I can put it in that way.
Right. Now, you spent a lot of time in Washington.
Yeah.
How were you able to, yourself personally, able to maneuver your way through it and stay on a true course? Were the Knights of Columbus part of your journey?
Yes. Yes, and I think, yes, the Knights of Columbus have been very strong in trying to keep a faithful citizenship that's not partisan, but understands the moral teaching of the church and where you're called to make a public witness on that, and you have to let the chips fall where they may in terms of political parties. But also, if you think about what's happened, beginning with John Paul II, we remember him for the liberation of Europe, the collapse of communism, but when he came out on that balcony and he said, "Be not afraid, open wide the doors to Christ, because he has the answer for our economic, our social, our political systems," right? A lot of people thought, he's coming from Poland, he's thinking about the Soviet Union. But I think today we say, you know what? He was talking about every country. Right? If Christ has the answer for every political system, every economic system, every social system, we cannot exclude him. Right? It's not just our preference or our consumer choice. If it's true, then we have a responsibility in a democracy to say, look, you better take a look at that.
And the point you make so clearly as well is the fact we're not talking about what's true for Catholics. We're talking about what's true for everybody.
Yeah, and that's something we're being kind of maneuvered into, right? We're just talking about our faith, so it's for us. But when we talk about racism being wrong, child abuse being wrong, the treatment of the unequal treatment of immigrants being wrong, or the poor being wrong. We're not speaking as Catholics. I mean, we're Catholics, right? But this isn't what we conclude as a matter only of faith. It's a matter of justice, right? So we have a responsibility for all people to say, look, this is what justice is about, right? Nobody says, oh, well, just because you shall not kill is in the 10 Commandments, it's a matter of faith, so let's repeal all the homicide laws, right? So we can't fall into that trap just because it might be a little bit unpopular with some people, that this is just a matter of faith. It's not like the Apostles' Creed, right? These are positions that we reason to based on reason, and they point toward justice based on the nature of the human person. And we got to be careful, because if the answer is there's no human nature, therefore there really are no human rights.
Right.
And that inhere in the person.
And you had quoted then Brother Knight John F. Kennedy, our rights come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God. And we play fast and loose with those rights when we lose sight of that, right?
Who would stand up and applaud today if President Kennedy said that today? Right?
Or President Obama. That would be great. And one thing I want to thank you so much for. The Knights of Columbus are great for men, and it's amazing in a lot of ways that you've been able to keep an organization inside the church for lay people growing so healthily in a way when many others haven't survived as well. And we look forward to the Knights really helping all the way across the spectrum. Thank you so much, Carl.
Thank you.
Spending a couple of minutes with us. It's great to see you. Speaking with our Supreme Knight, and of course, we're here at the Knights of Columbus, Carl Anderson. We're going to take a quick break, and then we will have the Supreme Chaplain, Archbishop Laurie from Baltimore. He's going to join us too. Don't miss that. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Knights of Columbus. It's the 132nd Supreme Convention from Orlando, Florida. I'm Doug Keck. We just had the Supreme Knight Carl Anderson. Now we're joined by His Excellency William E. Laurie, Archbishop of Baltimore, and the chaplain for the Knights of Columbus. Thank you, Bishop, for stopping by.
Good to be with you, Doug.
It's great to see you. You've been a great friend of EWTN for many years, going back to the days of the Basilica.
Way back when,
Right. And Michael Warsaw, our chairman, you and he have been buddies for a long, long time as well.
Long time,
right.
yeah.
So you've been working with, how long have you been the Supreme Chaplain?
I've been 9 years the Supreme Chaplain, and what a grace.
Okay. Now, let me just ask you quick, as the Supreme Chaplain, what are your major functions? Do you bring the spiritual aspect? Is that your major focus?
Yes, I think so. It's a lay-run organization, but I think the role of the chaplain is basically to be a pastor to the organization. It's to, through preaching, through the sacraments, through instruction and counsel, to keep alive the spirit of Father McGivney, the spirituality of the four principles of the order, and to help infuse the Knights with a spirit of evangelization so that it becomes, and is, and indeed it is, a real means of evangelization, just as Father McGivney intended it to be.
Something that transcends the parish and reaches out into the community, right?
Well, it's very interesting. Many of our councils are parish-based. You know, you get a group of men who love the Lord, love the church, they're good husbands and dads, and they're serving others. Boy, you have an engine of evangelization right in your parish. So a lot of it is at the parish level, but then, as you rightly say, it spills over to a state or a province, a country, and we're all around the world.
Right. Now, when one becomes a chaplain, let's just ask this for those of us out here not as familiar, they might say, do you have to be a priest to be a chaplain? You have to be a priest.
You do, because we see ourselves as successors of Father McGivney. Now, others help us. For example, deacons help us and other committed people. But the chaplain really is a successor to Father McGivney. And whether it's at the council level, state level, or
now, could a bishop be a chaplain, or would he necessarily be a chaplain to the state versus a particular council, or how does that work?
A bishop, in some places, the bishop or the archbishop is the chaplain for the whole state, but in as much as most bishops have so many things to do that it would be hard for them to give it all the time and attention it needs.
Right.
There would be an associate chaplain who would work under the bishop and with the bishop to make sure that the state is well tended to.
Have any of the popes ever been chaplains or associated directly with the Knights of Columbus over the years?
Well, they are certainly honorary members,
I see. Okay. Right.
but that might be a little much to ask.
Well, you're spreading all over the world, so it's just probably a matter of time before it's going to happen.
Well, and I'm so happy to see the order extending its reach.
Ukraine, Lithuania,
and South Korea.
Now South Korea, just in time, coming up in a couple of weeks for the Pope's visit there, basically. Same time we're having our family celebration that weekend, August 14th,
and I
15th.
think, Pope Francis called us to be a missionary church. The Knights have to be missionary. Father McGivney made us missionary right from the start. We started expanding into other countries. By, I think, 1908, for example, we were in the Philippines. So you think about that, to be faithful to Pope Francis, we have to continue spreading the Knights all around the world.
And speaking of faithful, there's a section in the Supreme Knight's presentation, his report, Faithful Citizenship. And one of the things you've been intrinsically tied into is the HHS mandate and the Fortnight for Freedom. Where are we with that? I think it's very clear, as Carl Anderson said, that kind of accommodation that was put out there. And, it seemed to be that we were running into a lot of people, I don't know if that was your impact as well, who said, what's the problem? This has already been taken care of. I've even heard newscasters on fairly conservative channels who were saying, well, the church has an exemption, so it's not a problem for the church. There's a lot of misunderstandings out there.
There really is. The issue here is the freedom to serve, because churches are exempt and very closely held church organizations. But the minute we step out and we start doing charitable work or educational work, then we're not exempt, but accommodated. But the accommodation is not really an accommodation at all. It is not an exemption. It still entangles us in being involved.
It's like a fig leaf, basically. It's a deception. It's like you're self-deceiving yourself.
So what we do is we basically say, we object to this, and the act of objecting is what triggers the coverage. And as the worthy Supreme Knight well said in his report, as our premiums go up and the cost of health care goes up, do we really believe that these contraceptives and abortifacients are being provided for free?
Right.
No one believes that. So we're getting entangled in this. And if we go along with the so-called accommodation for contraception and sterilization, what's next?
Right.
What about if it's surgical abortion next?
Right.
What will we
a
say
true
then?
slippery slope. We hear that used a lot, but this really is.
It really
and it's
is.
interesting too, because in a way you almost look at it and you say, in a sense, there was this sense of, well, abortion, that's a real hot button, but contraception, we can work with that. And I remember when that came out even during the last election, where it first came up as a question, and a reporter asked about contraception. Everybody was shaking their head going, why is he talking about contraception? Why is that an issue? But it's really, in some ways, seems to be designed as a wedge issue.
Of course it is. Pope Paul was absolutely correct and prophetic when he taught us about contraception and its evils in Humani Vitae. Unfortunately, that teaching is not well accepted, and people understand in political life that because it is not well accepted, that that's the entry point for forcing the hand of the church and churches and church organizations to get involved in anti-life procedures and medications. And that's what we're struggling with, but we have to be firm, popular or unpopular.
Right, exactly. I think, one of the things I was thinking about during this, the gospel reading today with Peter stepping out on the water and then getting fearful, and our Lord saying you have to have faith. In a lot of ways, that's not only what the Knights, but all Catholics are being asked to do, which is step out into society, step out with your friends, and realize, the water's going to be a little cold. You're going to start to think that maybe you're going to start to slip and fall. But if you keep your eyes fixed on Christ, you'll have the strength.
Absolutely. And you know, I think there are people who disagree with the teaching, but who also understand that it's not the business of the government to force the hand of the Catholic Church or any church. And that this, when the government becomes the final arbiter of conscience, it's really bad.
Right, exactly, and that's a good point. And many people get caught up in today, it's working for me, but you've got to look and say, now if the person who's making the decision of what's right or wrong doesn't agree with you anymore, suddenly you'll find yourself in the same position that the people you're not so happy with are in.
It can work both ways.
It works both ways.
Absolutely.
And you've got to be careful about
sure
that.
Can, Dave.
Right, exactly. So the culture of life is a big part of everything that the Knights of Columbus are involved in. Obviously, the March for Life, even more so. I know you've expanded into that. And of course, Washington, D.C. We're also dealing, as it ties in with the HHS mandate, other contraception, things like that. Also, the sense with insurance that you're starting to get into, where are we into rationing? Where are we going to be looking at? It seems like all of a sudden we're starting to hear the mercy killing, kind of the compassions, phony compassions coming up again on the back end of life.
We really have to be careful because, as we've already seen in Massachusetts and other states, threats at the end of life are becoming more and more common. And I think, for example, I know states where they're thinking about introducing this kind of legislation. And if we begin thinking about health care as a commodity, we think about rationing it, we think about providing it only for those who have a good quality of life. And that can be really dangerous, and that can aid and abet this kind of a move.
Well, it's amazing, too, on one level, because of history. No, the Nazis with life not worthy of life, that whole concept with eugenics coming out of Planned Parenthood as well, that same idea. And it's interesting that on one level, people who are very generous and very charitable want to take care of everybody, give everybody health care, which is a wonderful thing. At the same time, don't seem to have any problem with denying it to other people who they decide from a utilitarian position don't have any worth anymore, or a drain.
I think fundamentally driving the bishop's support for providing expanded health care is a perception, really more than a perception, it's the truth about the dignity of the human person, known by reason but revealed fully by Christ. And it is the true understanding that every human life is valuable in the sight of God from conception to natural birth, whether that person is healthy, perfectly functioning, or vulnerable, innocent, or at the other end, experiencing the ravages of old age. So I think we have to maintain that teaching and witness to that teaching in the public square, and it can't just be the bishops.
Right. No, that's true.
We can talk to the legislators and everybody in public life over and over again, but it's got to come from our Catholic faithful and people of goodwill who have to really advance this in the public square. Right.
Have we learned nothing from the great witness of St. John Paul II in the end of his life and what that meant to so many people?
If we want to be true to him, we got to be out in the public square bearing witness to this.
And it's for us to stand up for our faith and vote with our dollars and then vote with our votes to make sure that we, as much as possible, impact the culture into a culture of life.
Thank you so much.
Oh,
what a pleasure to be on
Always
with you.
Great to be on with you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Speaking with the Supreme Chaplain for the Knights of Columbus, William Lori, Archbishop of Baltimore. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back with more with Archbishop Timothy Broglio, and we'll talk about the military archbishop. And that's coming up next right here, and the military services. I'm Doug Keck. Stay with us. We're here live from Orlando.
Doug, thank you.
Oh, great. Okay. welcome back to the EWTN coverage of the 132nd Supreme Convention from Orlando, Florida. And of course, the Knights of Columbus, and we're moving into the later portion of our programs, and we're joined by the Archbishop of the Military Services USA, and that is Timothy Broglio. Thank you so much, Archbishop, for stopping by.
Pleasure to be here.
You're so good that you were willing to come by earlier and then come back later to be with us when we were trying to work out our schedule for you. And we're going to talk about what's going on with the military archdiocese, how it affects the chaplaincy, and also the work you're doing with military service, something called Warriors to Lords. So to introduce people to us so we can have a good conversation, let's show them a little bit of what it's like, okay? Let's take a look at that.
Lord, some have called it the heart of the church because the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared there and offered that message of healing. The military pilgrimage to Lourdes actually began as an attempt at rapprochement between the Germans and the French after the Second World War. This pilgrimage then became an instrument of Catholics in the military throughout the world to gather together in a moment of prayer for world peace.
The Knights of Columbus first joined with U.S. military personnel in a pilgrimage to Lourdes during the First World War, in which we helped our servicemen come to this shrine. Last year, we came back with our American wounded warriors in cooperation with the Archdiocese for Military Services. And this is part of a long tradition in the Knights of Columbus to support our military personnel, active, and our veterans, especially those who have been wounded or injured in the war.
Coming back from Afghanistan with lots of injuries, spiritual healing has been tremendous for me. Dealing with anger issues, dealing with just trauma, trying to strengthen my relationship with God. Being a part of this event with other Christians that are trying to do the same thing is a very unique event for me, like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
It has been amazing. I have met a lot of wonderful people that have been a great blessing, who have shared their stories, who have shared their experience, and who I can really relate to.
It's just comforting to know that while we have different experiences, we get it, we understand. We don't even have to talk. It's just being in each other's presence is very supportive. So to be here with all these other militaries is nothing short of amazing.
Our Catholic faith, our Catholic values promote a patriotism that at the same time respects the patriotism of individuals in other countries. And so here we see military personnel from many, many countries going to Mass together, praying together, on pilgrimage together as a sign of peace, sign of fraternity, and a sign that we can have a better future.
Going to war, there's certainly a sense of a spiritual void, you know, a lot of chaos and death and destruction, and so for a sign of God's presence, there's definitely a need.
There was emptiness before. I was just mad, and it took me this long to figure it out. Talking to the other couples, being around people that I feel comfortable with, some of the guys that been to Iraq, been to Afghanistan, share the same stories, you know, encouraging me, you know, take it slow, you know, and just talking to me, talking to the deacon. It was just great.
I think it will be positive for those who are here to see how many people want to help them to get better. And this pilgrimage won't be the end of it. This will continue to reach out to these men and women, these brave young men and women who were injured in some way, and now they're here for the healing of Mary's miraculous waters here at Lourdes to help them on the rest of their journey in life.
The procession was just a beautiful image to me, and that sea of light, that kind of cloud of witnesses, to see the church, embrace folks as they came in. And my hope is that they would experience that reconciliation, that return, that welcome back into the faith and family of God, and that there's healing and hope possible coming home.
And we're back here, and you just saw that beautiful little segment from Warriors to Lords about the Knight's work, and also working with the Military Archdiocese with Archbishop Broglio. And Archbishop, Warriors to Lords, that's what we were seeing there. What is the connection between the military services working on that with the Knights of Columbus?
Well, basically, this is an annual pilgrimage that's taken place for the last 56 years. It was begun after the Second World War as an attempt to have a rapprochement, especially between France and Germany. In fact, initially, the German soldiers were afraid to come into the town for fear that they would be poorly received. But it had its origins in that gesture, and it continues to be a moment of prayer for peace. And most of the military ordinariates throughout the world participate in this pilgrimage. The Knights of Columbus have made it possible for the Archdiocese for Military Services to bring any number of wounded warriors, and an expanded definition of that, not just people who are wounded in war, but take a soldier who's dying of cancer.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Or,
but it would have to be military.
It has to be military in terms of terms of the participation of the Knights. And this allows us to bring the wounded warrior and also his caregiver or her caregiver with us on pilgrimage to participate in this international event. And Lourdes is a place of healing.
Right. What is the PMI? What does that actually stand for?
That stands for Pèlerinage Militaire International, or International Military Pilgrimage.
Okay, okay. So was that from the French give us that one? Or?
Yes, the French gave us that one.
So I saw some picture of Marshal Foch, I think, at one time after World War II. There was an image of black and white photo, as I recall. Servant of Christ, servant of peace. So that whole idea of trying to take the idea that these men have been wounded, many of them in war, etc. But it's not about glorifying war or those kind of things.
No,
it's all about peace, because obviously Our Lady of Lourdes was not promoting war.
Certainly
promoting
not.
Healing.
And curiously enough, in the almost 7 years that I've been the Archbishop of Military Services, I've yet to meet anyone in the military who wants war.
Right. Good point.
They all want peace.
Right.
And they exist basically to assure that that we are a force for peace.
Right, and you talk about the reconciliation, peace, and healing. Now, this year, it happened a couple of months ago. You weren't able to go, right?
I was not, because it coincided with our annual memorial mass when we pray for those who have died.
Oh, okay, right.
Serving the country at the National Shrine.
Right. In fact, we usually carry that mass on EWTN, and we have for several years.
Yes, for which I'm very grateful.
Right, and it's great, and we always get requests. People want to know, are you going to carry it again this year? And the other thing I was interested in, the connection between the Knights of Columbus and the military, in a sense of the chaplaincy, something called the Army Hut Program, which predates the USO. I mean, this going back to World War I, right?
Exactly. Exactly. The Knights of Columbus actually funded Catholic priests as chaplains in the Army, both during the First World War and during the Second World War. Yeah. I don't have the statistics right at the top of my head, but an incredible number of chaplains were actually provided by the Knights of Columbus. And so the association between what was the military vicariate and is now the Archdiocese for Military Services and the Knights of Columbus goes back to 1917.
Right. Following World War I, the Knights also ran such a center in Lourdes itself.
Exactly.
Assisted the American soldiers in France with pilgrimage to the Marian Shrine. So it's very powerful. Let me ask you, let's talk a little bit about what your work is in the military and the chaplaincy. I'm assuming we always need priests, so I'm assuming we probably even more so need chaplains.
Desperately need them. I have only on active duty, I have only 234 Catholic priests. I would probably need about 500
Wow.
in order to.
And how many, do you know how many active Catholics are, in a sense, serving today?
Well,
or?
the Archdiocese, its total number is about 1.8 million,
Wow.
because we have active duty military, which is about 300,000, plus their dependents.
Okay.
Multiply that by 3, so you've got
Right,
about
sure.
900,000. And then we have Catholic patients in the 153 Veterans Administration hospitals. Finally, I'm also the proper pastor for any U.S. Catholic who works for the federal government outside of the United States.
Oh, okay.
So that would be embassies, federal contractors, anyone in that situation. And we really do not have the personnel to attend to those people, but we try to respond to their needs.
Well, if a priest was out there, now does he have to have military experience before he came through? Now, did you serve in the military?
I did not.
That's
I
what
did
I thought
not.
I remembered. You're the first one,
I'm
actually.
the first one who did not.
Right, exactly.
It's almost a fallback to the tradition of the archbishops of New York,
Okay.
who also weren't chaplains.
Okay. So if someone was a priest, they didn't have to have military experience, having served in the Guard. Someone could ask to be, now would they have to get a permission from the bishop to be relieved, to be able to go full-time on that? Because it's a full-time commitment,
It is a full-time commitment. They would have to be released by their bishop or their religious superior, because we also have religious
So you do have
priests.
religious?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
And then they would undergo officer training, and then they also have to spend a period at the chaplain school.
Okay. Could somebody decide they wanted to be, and they were a wonderful priest and a great chaplain, but they didn't make a good soldier, and they washed out of becoming an officer?
Well, then
Rare?
It's rare, but
Okay.
but we do have a system where we have contract priests. That is, priests who are not military, but they function with a contract on a military installation.
Oh, I see. Okay.
That is a less desirable solution, because obviously they don't have the same entree that a priest would have, that a chaplain would have, but they do meet the sacramental and spiritual needs. And
Well,
so
let me ask you, one of the things we were talking with Archbishop Laurie on just before, and Carl Anderson as well, that whole kind of HHS mandate, the religious liberty, and what's going on. Well, that's not just happening, among us lay people. In the military, we've read about things where people were being basically pushed to agree or do certain things, whether they would be, same-sex marriage kind of situation or other things. How is that impacting your work?
Well, it impacts it in the sense that obviously it makes us much more attentive. We lobbied very strongly for the freedom of conscience part that was put in the military budget. And one of the reasons to do that was to ensure that the First Amendment rights, both of the military and of chaplains, are respected.
Right.
As a general rule, the military has to respect what I say a priest can do.
Okay.
So that much, up to this point, we've had no difficulty with that. But it does require constant vigilance, because there is a tendency on the part of the administration to use the military as a proving ground or a guinea pig for their programs.
Right. It seems to be sometimes on euthanasia, we seem to be modeling ourselves in the Netherlands. I don't think anybody wants to see our military being modeled on the Netherlands either going forward, But yeah, so there's a lot of pressure that comes on for someone like you. Well, if you yourself, even getting promoted, I thought this was interesting. You talked a little bit when we were watching the video about the idea of, it's not that you decide who gets promoted as a chaplain. And so the fact that the military makes the decision of that, the fact that someone is cooperative or not cooperative can be used against them in their ability to move up through the ranks.
Certainly can. And that would be done very subtly, because obviously if it could be proven, then there would be, one could make an inspector general's investigation of the situation. But it could be done very subtly. And obviously for us, promotion is not the goal.
Right.
But it is true that if you do not have anyone at the command table, then you're on the menu. So we need to have
That's a good way of putting it, right.
Who also are in positions of high rank, so that they can represent the Catholic position and also inform their superiors about what the Catholic position is.
Okay. Just before we go, what would you like to tell our audience here from EWTN watching the convention right now that they need to understand about the Catholic chaplaincy and its needs?
I would tell them two things. One, to pray for vocations. I think that's very, very important. And also to pray for our military. Our military is under tremendous stress after 12 years of war. Anyone who sees the news knows about the tensions that exist in our world, and those affect the men and women in uniform, and so their prayers are very important.
And of course that impacts the chaplains who have to deal with it too.
It certainly does.
So what rank are you?
I'm no rank. If I step on a military installation, I'm accorded the privileges of a 4-star, either general or admiral. And that would be the same for any archbishop.
So I don't have to salute you here.
No.
I just have to respect you. Thank you so much, Archbishop.
Thank you.
Great to have you here speaking with Archbishop Broglio, and we're going to take a break right now to see a special documentary that the Knights have produced. It's called Father Called Francis, Pope from the New World. It was mentioned earlier by Carl Anderson during his talk. And stay with us. Again, it's Francis, Pope from the New World. Wonderful show.
Annuncio vobis gaudium magnum, habemus papam. Voi sapete che il dovere del conclave era di dare un vescovo a Roma. Sembra che i miei fratelli cardinali sono andati a prenderlo quasi alla fine del mondo, ma siamo qui.
A church that will not stay still, a non-static church. We can be sure that this will be the church of Pope Francis.
This has always set Bergoglio apart. A great Jesuit, a man of excellent formation. Above all, he is a man of action.
If we read Pope Francis's writings, we're going to always see this concern with going to the frontiers of poverty, of exclusion, and of those who are furthest from God.
He was always a person who had a lot of courage and plenty of bravery to stand before the powerful and say what he thought. The voice of those who had no voice. That was Cardinal Bergoglio.
A man who is kind of a desert saint and a great and brilliant administrator. The combination of these two characteristics is not very common.
Pope Francis, his life has been exemplary in precisely the type of personal witness that the new evangelization calls for. He becomes a model for millions of Catholics around the world today.
Argentina is a country of sweeping beauty and diversity. Here you will find some of the world's tallest mountains, largest prairies, and breathtaking waterfalls. And when standing on the Tierra del Fuego, the southernmost tip of the country, one can look out towards Antarctica and truly say, I have traveled to the ends of the earth. But the cultural heart of Argentina is Buenos Aires, known as the Paris of South America. It is a sprawling cosmopolitan city, highlighted by its European-style architecture and rich cultural life. But it is also a city of stark contrasts, where a dark underside of poverty and crime consume entire neighborhoods. In the 20th century, millions of immigrants arrived on these shores, seeking a better life. The future Pope Francis was born into a family of Italian origin. His father, Mario Bergoglio, hailed from the Piemonte region of Italy. He and his wife Regina settled into Barrio Flores, a teeming neighborhood of immigrants. They raised their family of 5 children in this home.
He was a regular boy. He didn't stand out in any remarkable way. He was very polite, very neat. He went to a public school. His parents were from a modest family, and Bergoglio was a great lover of the tango. He was a passionate fan of the tango stars Carlos Gardel and Ada Falcón.
Young Bergoglio's passion for the tango only paled in comparison to his love for San Lorenzo de Almagro, the Buenos Aires soccer team he continues to follow as Pope. Quite fittingly, the team was founded by Father Lorenzo Massa, a priest who reached out to the youth of Buenos Aires.
It was his neighborhood team. It was where his father would take him as a boy. It also has to do with the identity of being porteño, the identity of Buenos Aires.
Young Jorge loved soccer, tango, and spending time with friends. He also had a girlfriend he enjoyed spending time with. But it was one unexpected evening that he discovered the seeds of a religious vocation here in the Basilica San Jose de Flores.
He felt that God was searching for him. He describes a moment when he was going out on an excursion with friends, and beforehand he decides to go to confession. And right at that moment, in the presence of a deeply spiritual priest, Bergoglio experiences such a strong vocational calling that he decides to not go out with his friends. And this becomes a turning point in his life.
Dopo la confessione ho sentito che qualcosa era cambiata. E io non ero lo stesso. Avevo sentito proprio come una voce, una chiamata. Ero convinto che io dovevo diventare sacerdote.
As he privately discerned a call to the priesthood, Bergoglio graduated with the chemical technician's diploma. Shortly after, he entered the Society of Jesus. His conviction as a young Jesuit seminarian would be strengthened by a life-threatening bout of pneumonia, which led to the removal of part of one of his lungs.
He was experiencing this tremendous suffering, really reached the depths of suffering. Everyone was saying, "Don't worry, it will pass." And he said, "Those words were useless to me." What really helped him was when a nun came to visit him and said, "You are imitating Jesus, the suffering of Jesus." That truly helped alleviate his pain. And when talking about his vocation, he says that this was something that really impacted him. It was very important.
Sí, lo cuenta como una cosa muy fuerte, muy importante.
More than 4 decades after he first entered the seminary, Archbishop Jorge Bergoglio of Buenos Aires was elevated to the College of Cardinals by Pope John Paul II in St. Peter's Square. It was 2001. Argentina's economy was mired in crisis between a collapsed government, widespread unemployment, riots, and a devalued currency. For Cardinal Bergoglio, his duty was simple: protect the innocent and comfort the suffering.
Pedimos ser custodios de nuestros hermanos que están pasando por momentos difíciles y no tienen que comer, son desalojados, no tienen techo, los hermanos que están solos. Hacer la paz es hacernos cargo de esos hermanos. Cuando ya olvidamos a los hermanos que están sufriendo, ya sembramos una semilla de violencia.
Bergoglio always used to say that the poor and the people that are left on the street, he would say that the side of the road becomes invisible. And Bergoglio would always say that we end up not seeing them. They form a part of an unknown landscape. He wanted us to open our eyes so that we could take them into account.
And I'd be sitting here, "Hello, Father," I'd say. And I would get down and greet him. Before leaving, the last thing he always said was, "Pray for me. Hallelujah." He always said, "Pray for me."
Sí, también siempre ha sido igual, ¿no? He has always been the same, worried about the problems of humankind, the injustices and the poverty. He walked through the neighborhoods of Buenos Aires and San Miguel. He walked everywhere, and he knew and loved the people, and they loved him very much.
Aprecia la gente lo quiere mucho, además.
The fact is, he was always a person that liked to learn about reality by living it. You would always run into him in the neighborhoods. He was never a desk priest.
For me, he was very down to earth and normal because I would travel with him in the subway. I would speak with him and he would come to our parish. We would go walking in the streets together. He was our priest. He was one of the priests of our neighborhood, the priest of the Via. In truth, it pains me to have lost him. If we needed something, we would call him. Bergoglio would always lend a hand. Bergoglio is always listening.
Bergoglio siempre da una mano, que Bergoglio siempre está escuchando.
Bergoglio had a phrase that he used more than once. The church has to be on the borders. Then he would tell the priests, you don't call the people to the churches. You have to go where the people are.
As a child, Bergoglio was raised by his maternal grandmother. His love for her profoundly impacted his views on care for the elderly and the dying.
His grandmother impacted him very much, and he had such a great admiration, a great care for the elderly. He always said that society should not abandon them, but look after them, care for them. He had this great concern.
Una fuerte preocupación.
En una sociedad egoísta, siempre a los mayores se los trata de tener guardados. Porque o molestan, o están achacados, o están enfermos, o en la misa. Yo quisiera decirles que es una injusticia llamar a los mayores clase pasiva.
Cardinal Bergoglio's consistent stand for Catholic values in every area, for the poor, the unborn, and the sanctity of marriage, drew the ire of Argentina's political elites.
Pope Francis really has a big problem with the structure of governments, especially in Argentina, where you have this kind of political entrepreneurship. The leadership lives in a very ostentatious manner, and the poor are suffering a lot of poverty and exclusion, and Cardinal Bergoglio opposed this.
When Nestor and Cristina Kirchner pushed to legalize same-sex marriage in Argentina in 2010, Bergoglio opposed the plan, noting that every child deserved both a mother and a father. President Cristina Kirchner was outraged at his opposition to the law and attacked him personally, accusing Bergoglio of leading a modern-day inquisition. But whether it was social or moral issues, Bergoglio consistently defended the Catholic position as it related to the lives of Argentinians.
What becomes very clear in looking at the life of Pope Francis is a Christian witness that is focused on great respect and charity for the human person. He does not choose between social justice or social issues because he sees a unity of all of these issues.
A él le interesaba la situación social.
He cared about the social situation of the needy, the elderly, and the children. That concern was misinterpreted by the media. He never intervened in politics, that is true. Reporters interpreted his words as allusions to politics, and that's another thing.
Hacía alusiones a la política, eso es otra cosa.
A la incertidumbre de un país dañado por privilegios, por los que utilizan el poder en su provecho, por quienes exigen sacrificios incalculables escondidos en sus burbujas de abundancia mientras evaden su responsabilidad social y lavan las riquezas que el esfuerzo de todos produce.
Cardinal Bergoglio wrote that his strongly worded homilies were not expressions of partisan politics, but a message for everyone about the need for morality in daily life. But the media and some politicians took or applied it personally.
President Nestor Kirchner came out of the church and announced that Bergoglio was the leader of the opposition. There was a lot of resentment there, and that was an opportunity for them to sort of collude and put the narrative out there that Bergoglio was a collaborator with the military government.
Left-wing journalist and former leftist guerrilla Horacio Verbitsky accused Bergoglio of being complicit in the kidnapping of 2 Jesuit priests during the violent turmoil of Argentina's infamous Dirty War in the 1970s.
There has long been a political vendetta in Argentina between the people on the left who lost the Dirty War and didn't manage to turn Argentina into a communist country, and the people on the right who fought against them. And Father Bergoglio was caught in the middle of that. And because he did not ally himself with the guerrillas during the war, they've had a long-standing resentment against him.
What is true is that these hypotheses always became a policy against Bergoglio, supported by the government of Nestor and Cristina Kirchner, who have always seen Bergoglio as a political enemy.
Horacio Verbitsky actually worked for the guerrillas. He's an editor at a newspaper called Página 12. Argentines laugh and they call it the official gazette because it so much speaks the government's line. I think he truly saw this as an opportunity to inflict damage on the church.
To understand the accusations, we must trace the rise of Pope Francis. On April 22, 1973, Father Bergoglio took his final vows as a Jesuit. He had spent more than 15 years in formation. During these years, he witnessed the historic rise and fall of Juan and Eva Perón and learned well the fleeting nature of political power. By this time, despite the fact that he was just 36 years old, he had so impressed his fellow Jesuits that he was named Provincial Superior for all of Argentina. But the young priest faced steep challenges.
It was a difficult time because in 1973 we had 4 presidents. In 1976, the military took over the government. So Bergoglio was the provincial during one of the most difficult periods in the history of Argentina.
Bergoglio was also challenged by changes within the church. A growing number of priests and theologians in Latin America began to see liberation through political, economic, and social revolution. In its most extreme interpretation, liberation theology served to justify guerrilla movements with Marxist revolutionary ideas. Bergoglio guided his priests away from politics and confrontation. Nevertheless, political violence sometimes struck too close to home. The new military dictatorship under General Videla was opposed by Marxist guerrilla groups and labor unions. The junta set out to ruthlessly eliminate its enemies. The ensuing violence became known as the Dirty War and tore the nation apart. Horacio Verbitsky claimed that during the 1976 kidnapping of 2 Jesuit priests, Bergoglio turned a blind eye since he disagreed with their political involvement.
They couldn't accept the rules that Bergoglio set as a superior. They had to leave the area where they were staying because he could not guarantee their safety in the face of the many dangers involving the kidnappings of people during the military dictatorship. But they did not agree, and they decided to leave the Society of Jesus, to stop being Jesuits, and continue their pastoral and political activities. Shortly after, they were kidnapped by the military forces and were imprisoned and tortured.
Bergoglio got the chaplain who served the dictator to call in sick so that he could go to see the dictator himself and personally appeal for the release of those Jesuits.
One of the kidnapped priests, Father Francisco Jalix, has himself denied the allegations, saying, quote, "The fact is, Orlando Urillo and I were not denounced by Father Bergoglio."
He did a lot of things behind the scenes, undercover, to try to help people. One story where he gave his clothing and his ID to someone who is being chased by the military so that guy could get across the border and out of the country. He was basically trying to help people from a humanitarian standpoint.
His years as Jesuit provincial, followed by a period as rector of theology and philosophy at the Colegio Maximo de San Jose, would reveal the character and leadership of the future pope.
I think
that if there is a theme that becomes underlined, it is his mercy. Bergoglio is capable of forgiving the things that perhaps we would not forgive. He was a spiritual man, a man who prayed a lot. When we would get up at 6:30 or 7 o'clock to go to Mass, at this time Bergoglio had already prayed and had laundered the bedding and towels for 150 Jesuits. He would have taken them out, hung them up to dry, and we would just be trying to get out of bed.
He taught us how to be real friends, not just co-workers, friends. We have to love each other. We have to stand together, especially in the most difficult moments.
He was very intelligent. He was academic and studious, but above all, he had an intuitive intelligence. He could read people immediately, and he would see through you, and you couldn't hide things from him. And with that, he would help you.
He taught us the human dimension of the apostolate, of the mission. I can't get the faith across to a boy if that boy is hungry.
I was doing the spiritual exercises, and on the 4th day he called me and said that I was very comfortable praying, sleeping, and eating. At the door there is a woman with 4 children without shelter, so stop your retreat and find them shelter. Once they have a house, you can go back to praying. We came back after we completed the mission in which he intervened directly. He knew how to help people, and he knew which doors to knock on to find them help.
In 1986, Father Bergoglio traveled to Germany to further his theological studies. Upon his return to Argentina, he was sent to Cordoba, where he humbly served the Jesuit community as confessor and spiritual director. No one predicted high church office in his future. However, his humility caught the attention of Cardinal Antonio Quaresino of Buenos Aires. In 1992, he appointed Father Bergoglio auxiliary bishop. 5 years later, Bergoglio would succeed as archbishop and become the spiritual leader of the city he loved.
Había recibido una casa
As a bishop, he had received a big house, very beautiful. And he went through the house and found it full of items such as blankets, non-perishable food. So what did he do? He went out with these items and gave them away.
El Señor viene a inaugurar su reino. Con su humildad y mansedumbre nos desinstala de todo sueño cómodo de poder y vanidad eclesiásticos. Y nos invita a volvernos disponibles a estar al servicio de los demás.
He was the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, the highest authority of the church in Argentina. And the first surprising impression was that he answered his own phone without secretaries. This was so shocking that the foreign colleagues asked me, "But are you sure he's the cardinal? Could it be his assistant?"
We have all bumped into him in the streets of Buenos Aires. I saw him in the subway more than one time, and we would talk. He is a man that has never owned a car when he was Archbishop, and never accepted a taxi or a car ride anywhere, because he would say, "The public ways of transportation allow me to meet people and understand what they are going through."
Los medios públicos a mí me permiten encontrarme con la gente y entender lo que la gente está viviendo.
Cardinal Bergoglio's influence extended even beyond Buenos Aires. When Pope Benedict XVI came to Aparecida, Brazil, it was Bergoglio who was put in charge of writing one of the most important documents on the Church in the New World.
I had the great pleasure of meeting him in Aparecida, Brazil, during the meetings of the Latin American Bishops' Conference. When I listened to his homily, he said some things that were very profound and very impactful. I've seen so few people like him who are able to impart such deep thoughts in a simple and relevant way, breaking with protocols. He would share with you an anecdote and touch your heart with its message.
Yet his activities in Buenos Aires were even more powerful than his words.
For him, the center of Buenos Aires was not the Plaza de Mayo, where the powerful live, but rather the city's periphery. As Bishop of Buenos Aires, he always sought after those neglected by the powerful. He made them the focus. This not only helped the people in these neighborhoods live better lives, but it also made the rest of the city of Buenos Aires look at these neighborhoods in a different way.
I asked him, why Mass in the Via? Those are the kinds of questions I would ask him. Or why do you come to the Via? And he would say that he liked being close to the poor, because the poor would offer him their hearts.
Working for Cardinal Bergoglio, Father Di Paola's efforts to rejuvenate the infamous Buenos Aires slum Via 21, a neighborhood where taxis won't travel and even police won't enter, gained the attention of drug lords who threatened his life.
I went one day and said to him, "Look, they have threatened to kill me, and I think it could be serious." Then he took his head in his hands. I remember he sat down, and the first thing he said was, "I'm going to ask God that if something has to happen, let it happen to me and not you."
Cardinal Bergoglio immediately raised Father Di Paola's profile and made sure the media knew of the death threats. The outcry of public support helped save Father Di Paola's life.
So they really were difficult moments, but you never felt alone, because your friends, the people in the Villas, people from other places too, people from society in general, and most of all the bishop, were standing side by side.
The Archdiocese of Buenos Aires is a very complex archdiocese. He supported many programs that other priests and pastoral workers carried out in the prisons, with street kids, so many initiatives, and they acquired quite a strong dynamic in the Archdiocese.
This has always set Bergoglio apart. I would never define him as an intellectual. He was a man of action. He is not a man that is interested in culture as an academic subject. Interestingly, he respected that work a lot, but it was not his priority. His priority was social action.
En esta ciudad se explota a trabajadores en talleres clandestinos. En esta ciudad se rapta a las mujeres y a las chicas. Y se las somete al uso y al abuso de su cuerpo. Se las destruye en su dignidad. No gastemos nuestra ternura en cuidar y atender mascotas, dejando de lado el hambre de los chicos. Pero todos tenemos que luchar por nuestros valores y por defender el hogar, por defender la vida, por defender los valores cristianos, defender nuestros chicos, por defender a los chicos que están por venir, por defender a nuestros ancianos, por defender a nuestros enfermos. Hoy yo he venido acá para dar un signo de que tenemos que luchar para defender y acompañar a nuestros enfermos.
Someone asked me what would be his most outstanding quality. It's difficult to say, but one is his sensitivity. Being attentive to others, being sensitive, listening to the needs of others. He worked a lot in the prisons. Not many people knew this. He would often visit the hospitals, visit the nursing homes, being so close to those in need.
The defining image of Bergoglio's compassion and love for the underprivileged was his custom of taking the Holy Thursday washing of feet and bringing it to the suffering of Buenos Aires.
Es un gesto de caridad, de amor, de humildad.
It's an act of charity, love, and humility that Pope Francis has wanted to do all these years as Archbishop of Buenos Aires. Going to the poorest people, going to the people suffering the most. I believe he does it as an act of following Jesus' example.
Como un gesto de que, siguiendo el ejemplo de Jesús,
He washed my feet and kissed my feet. It was very emotional, very beautiful. It was such a moving thing for me. In this moment, I felt joy and sadness, but real joy seeing the Cardinal do this to me, and I started to cry a little.
Cardenal me haga eso, medio que me puse a llorar un poco, ¿no?
Bergoglio always kept a very low profile, but he was a very determined man, and he knew how to knit an infinite number of relationships with all kinds of people. That is a trait that he always had. His personal relationships, a great memory, and extreme confidence in his Rolodex.
Bueno, una vez preguntó lo que es muy común.
One day he asked me something that is very common here in Argentina, and especially in Buenos Aires. What team are you? Meaning, which one do you support? So he is a fan of San Lorenzo, and I said River. Well, when River was not playing well and San Lorenzo was, he started joking about it, and I realized that this was a different man. A man who tries to get closely acquainted with his neighbor, someone with whom we can begin walking down a path of deep understanding.
De acercamiento profundo.
Cardinal Bergoglio and Rabbi Skorka's private meetings resulted in the co-authoring of a best-selling book titled On Heaven and Earth.
Nos sentíamos comprometidos. Primero,
we are first committed to demonstrating that we can walk together, that we should walk together, each one true to their own identity, yet striving to present a message of spirituality and peace for Argentina, for the city of Buenos Aires, and for the world.
Un momento para el mundo.
Renunziare iter da die 28 febbraio bis millesimo 13 hora 20 sedes Rome sede Sancti Petri vacet et conclave ad elicendum novum sum pontificem episcopus competit convocandum esse.
My first reaction was one of complete surprise and disbelief.
The notion of a Holy Father resigning was not something that we are at all accustomed to thinking of. But I must say, I came to the conclave without any clear ideas as to what would happen.
The conclave produced not just a change, but also continuity.
What's very profound about the election of Pope Francis is it was as if the cardinals in the conclave actually were reading Pope Benedict's encyclical on charity when they elected this man whose life has personified the Church's mission of charity.
Buonasera. Padre nostro che sei nei cieli, sia santificato il tuo nome, venga il tuo regno.
To me, it was very moving that, as he led us in the Our Father and the Hail Mary, the prayers that every Catholic knows, whether you're a rocket scientist or an illiterate peasant, it was a very beautiful moment as he led everyone in prayer. Everyone wanted someone who would be able to communicate the gospel as effectively as John Paul II and Pope Benedict.
You want a man of God, you want a man of good pastoral governance, you want a man with a sense of the Church Universal, you want a good communicator, and he fills those bills. Where he comes from is gravy. You talk about a booster shot to the Church in the Americas. This is going to be a real blessing.
The election of the first pope from the American continent caused widespread joy throughout Latin America, but especially in the Pope's homeland.
Un papa argentino, un papa latinoamericano, el primero en la historia. Y la verdad es un orgullo para uno ser joven y vivir este momento junto a nuestros amigos y con toda la iglesia también.
Una felicidad inexplicable, una emoción está en la Plaza de Mayo que no hay palabras, hay que vivirlo.
Ya estoy feliz porque es un hombre capaz, inteligente, humilde, con muchas ganas de poder transformar la iglesia.
Fue muy emotivo.
It was very emotional. I saw that face, and suddenly, the image dressed in white. He telephoned me from Rome. He said, "Listen, they didn't let me leave Rome. I came here, they seized me, and they didn't let me go back."
The first thing I felt along with joy was the sadness of realizing that we have lost him. Now he belongs to the whole world. But no doubt, it's a great joy.
Providence wanted someone from here to be elected, someone from this land that we love so much. It has awakened feelings of religious fervor.
Lo que se resolvió en la reunión de labor ayer, lo cumplí.
Senator Liliana Negre de Alonso, a longtime supporter of Cardinal Bergoglio during contentious public debates over abortion and same-sex marriage, was addressing the Argentine Senate when news of the new pope arrived.
Sí, pido una interrupción. Disculpen, no puedo seguir hablando. Estoy sumamente emocionada. Como católica, como argentina, los católicos del mundo, y les pido disculpas los que no lo son, tenemos nuestro nuevo jefe, y como argentino me siento sumamente orgullosa de un héroe, un mártir, un hombre que ha dado su vida por la iglesia, perseverancia, lealtad. Me pongo de pie simbólicamente ante el nuevo soberano de la Iglesia Católica, ante el sucesor de Pedro, ante el representante de Cristo en la tierra, y se me hincha el corazón de orgullo porque un hermano argentino ha llegado a ocupar el lugar. Gracias, presidente.
Muchas gracias, senadora.
Disculpen esta breve interrupción.
Muchas gracias.
Fue vituperado.
He was reviled. He was insulted. He was defiled. And as a reward, the Lord put him in that place as the successor of Peter on earth. I went to my office weeping with joy and gave thanks to God because he compensated him. This person who had suffered in the flesh the hours of Calvary.
En carne propia las llagas del Calvario.
Despite her previous well-publicized attacks on him, Pope Francis welcomed Argentine President Cristina Kirchner for his first meeting with the foreign head of state.
He was also very humble and practiced what he preached. Forgiveness, forgiveness, forgive, and forget. He gave witness to this with the president because he had asked 14 times to be granted a visit with her, yet he was always refused. 11 times the president was outside of Argentina during the annual Te Deum Mass in an effort to avoid him. And yet, instead of granting her a mere protocol visit, he received her for a 2-hour lunch, and they spoke together without press, without protocols, without rancor.
Sin rencores.
The excitement over the new pope was felt most strongly by those closest to his heart.
I jumped up and started crying like Mary Magdalene.
I had so many goosebumps, such a good feeling. It was such a joy because the first thing I thought was, oh, he washed my feet, Bergoglio, and now he's Pope.
Bergoglio, le digo yo, y ahora es Papa, le digo yo.
Y bueno, ya está, ya hay una alegría grande.
There is such a great joy. There is a feeling that this is the Pope of the Villas, of the slums. That's what they call him. They gave us a poster with that inscription for our chapel. They brought it to us from Villa 21. The way he identified with the Villas, those are the people that are very happy about the election of Francis.
In the days after his election, everyone looked to share in the historic moment, including the sport club the Pope followed since childhood.
He was elected Pope on a Wednesday, and San Lorenzo played the next Saturday or Sunday in Colón de Santa Fe. We wanted to somehow pay tribute to him in our jerseys. We asked for authorizations from the Argentine Soccer Association, and they authorized us for that one time to add the picture of Pope Francis. For us, it is something tremendously important, not just for San Lorenzo de Almagro. Even though it's a big club in Argentina, it wasn't so well known up until now with the new Pope. It has had a tremendous significance for us. It has fulfilled and completely exceeded our expectations.
A pope not only from Argentina, not only from Latin America, but a pope from the New World. A pope from the Americas, from the ecclesia in America that John Paul II dreamed of.
En América Latina se vivía también momentos complicados.
Latin America has gone through some very difficult times. But the fact that we have these great qualities and great values such as religious fervor, that strong sense of family, those cultural roots, and ancestral peoples. With this accumulation of cultural and religious wealth, which can now be shared at a universal level, this is an important moment.
For me, the election of the new Pope, Pope Francis, who is the first Pope from the American continent, is a special sign from God that we need to participate actively in the life of the Church, and that it is the time for all of us to feel the responsibility of being an important part of the life of the Church.
I was impressed by his efforts to not to be captured by the office, but to be actually himself in the service of the office of St. Peter. You know, he didn't want to only be the Pope, he wanted to be a human being. You know, he paid his own bills, he asked for a blessing of the people on the balcony of St. Peter's. And I hope he continues to exercise his individual personality in the context of his service as the Pope.
And in this Pope, we have someone who teaches by his personal witness and by the language that he uses to relate to the average person.
Colegio Máximo, buenas tardes.
She said, "Hello, this is Jorge." When he told me that he was Jorge, I asked, "The Pope?" And he said, "Yes, how did you recognize my voice?" And I told him, "How wouldn't I recognize you?" He is very humble,
And she says to me, very surprised, the Pope is calling. And I told her, well, put him through. And he said, happy birthday. And I told him, how are you, Jorge? Well, Francis now, but he likes to be called Jorge like always. He's very close to many people and he remembers their birthdays. And so, even though he was announced as Pope, he also remembered my birthday.
He showed something he has always lived, that joy of being with the people. I believe that now he understands that his Petrine ministry is for the people.
In the days after his election, the world asked, what can we expect from this simple and humble Pope?
This is the big question that I don't have sufficient authority to answer, so I have to refer to his words. A church that will not stay still, a non-static church. We can be sure that this will be the church of Pope Francis. There is a phrase, the person who stays locked in a room will suffocate. He speaks of a church that is not self-referential, a church that reaches out to the people.
He wants a holy church, or at least one that strives to obtain virtue, and that virtue has to be demonstrated, particularly in poverty. That is why he chose the name Francis.
In his first international voyage, Pope Francis traveled to Brazil for World Youth Day in Rio de Janeiro. There, he welcomed millions of young people, challenging them to discover the transformative power of their Catholic faith.
Já está sentindo o espírito da jornada muito forte nas pessoas, elas te olham diferente quando te veem com o kit. A gente sente realmente que é uma alegria receber os peregrinos e receber o Papa.
A emoção é muito grande ter um Papa dos pobres, um Papa que vai ao encontro da juventude, que anda na chuva, que pisa no chão sujo, que pisa nesse chão banhado de sangue, que muitas vezes sangue da nossa juventude.
Foi uma semana excelente, teve um astral muito bom, eu pude sentir uma paz assim que eu nunca senti há muitos anos, assim. Eu que sou uma pessoa até nova, assim, mas eu nunca havia visto aqui no Rio uma coisa tão maravilhosa como eu estou vendo agora.
If we think back to the election of Pope John Paul II in the 1970s, we saw this great awakening of Christianity behind the Iron Curtain. The great challenge today is, how do we deal with the new globalization of the church, where the vast majority of Catholics today live in poverty? And so now with Pope Francis may be able to do for the Western Hemisphere what John Paul II was able to do for Europe and the Soviet bloc. What a Pope does in our age can reach far beyond the Catholic Church. And the election of Pope Francis means that the poor now have the most important spiritual leader on earth as a very personal advocate for them. His election challenges everyone to look at their neighbor differently, to reach out in charity, and to understand that every life deserves our help. There is the potential for a real global reawakening of love of neighbor as a result of this Pope's leadership.
Non dimentichiamo mai che il vero potere è il servizio e che anche il Papa, per esercitare il potere, deve entrare sempre più in quel servizio che ha il suo vertice luminoso sulla croce. Deve guardare al servizio umile, concreto, ricco di fede di San Giuseppe, e come lui aprire le braccia per custodire tutto il popolo di Dio e accogliere con affetto e tenerezza la intera umanità, specie i più poveri, i più deboli, i più piccoli, quelle che Matteo descrive nel giudizio finale sulla carità. Chi ha fame, sete, chi è straniero, nudo, malato, in carcere. Solo qui serve con amore sa custodire.
And that is a very nice program. I saw our good friend Alejandro Bermudez's name on that as well, along with Andrew Walther, who was anchoring with me earlier today. Now we're joined by Monsignor Pedro C. Catorio. Now he's the media director for the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines. Welcome.
Thank you.
Nice to have you here, Monsignor.
My pleasure.
And, you know, it's amazing to realize the Knights are everywhere in the world, that they actually are. And not only are they in the Philippines, they've been in the Philippines for more than 100 years, right?
Yes, from 1905.
Right to now. So we want to talk specifically about something called the Livelihood Project. Now, this kind of came about because of Typhoon Haiyan, also known as Typhoon Yolanda. Yes. Two different names, the international name and the local name, and that was last November 2013. What exactly happened? I remember usually when these disasters happen on EWTN, we try to offer a rosary and tell people about it and at least pray for it, but what was it like on the ground?
You mean the typhoon? It
Yes.
was the biggest so far in history. The wind is the biggest. I think it was 200
miles per hour. And you were saying, was it Lady Gulf, which some Americans would be familiar with from World War II, the height of the waves were?
The typhoon surge went up to between 17 to 18 feet.
Wow.
That was the wave that devastated the city of Tacloban and the neighboring towns from the island of Samar and the island of Leyte.
And about 6,000 people, you figured, actually lost their lives?
The official tally of the government is statistics about 6,000 plus, but it's more than that because until now, those missing have never been recovered.
So there were a lot of missing who, after the fact, never got reclassified as actually. What do you think the numbers are more like?
The local residents, they're saying it's going to be between 10 to 15.
Oh, wow. Okay. So almost double, triple the original numbers. Now, one of the things that's really interesting is the Knights are there. Now, are you a chaplain for the Knights in the Philippines?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what I thought was really interesting in this Livelihood Project was, you know, you rush in, you try and help people, but it's kind of that idea of teaching somebody to fish so they can take care of themselves in a sense. There's something kind of unique and different about how the Knights handle this, right?
Yes.
Giving seed and things like that, right?
Yes. Yeah, well, two stages. The first stage was the relief.
Right.
They were the second responders, actually, helping them with food, the basic necessities. And after that, sometime January, they went into rehabilitation work. Initially, it was about the distribution of seeds, coconut seeds, to farmers whose farms were also devastated. But after that, then they went into boat making and distribution. There is one thing very peculiar with that, which was not done by anybody else. What they did was the Knight of Columbus did was to raise the dignity of the beneficiaries by selecting two groups. One would be the victims who would build the boats. So the Knights of Columbus organized 11 builders, groups of builders, 11, who would make initial 100 boats to be given to the beneficiaries.
And those would have been maybe fishermen who lost their boats, right? So lost their way of earning an income, supporting their family.
So that was a case of hitting two birds with one stone.
Right, okay.
So the multiplicity of benefits was doubled because of that scheme. But of course, it's not even a dent of the whole thing because the victims went into several thousands.
Right.
So Knights of Columbus initially is building, like the first was 100, now they're building 120 more.
Well, it's always difficult because, you know, even as big an organization as this is for the Knights of Columbus, you know, to be able to take on something that really dwarfs many times the resources of an entire country or the world, to be able to jump in and do these things, right?
Yes, and also it is not just the boat; it's also the fishing gear. They give nets, you know, the line and so on. And the selection process is also one thing, because it would be very difficult when you have like thousands of poor people needing boats.
Right.
How would you select? This is the work of the Knights of Columbus. They would send members of the local case Knights of Columbus to study who really is.
Some of the 300,000 Knights in the Philippines would be
volunteering to do
volunteer to look into the case to make sure this was somebody who really was in need.
Yes, so that there will not be quarrels and envy and among beneficiaries.
Well, we run into there's things happening in the United States not too long ago where you find out, unfortunately, there are people who jump in and start claiming losses and things that never occurred, and then the people who really need the help aren't always getting it.
This one did it well. So far, there was nothing like that. So, but they had to spend several days in the community, in the fishing village, for the community to select who among you is worth, receiving one.
When was the diocese of archdiocese, was it pronounced Palo?
Palo, yes.
And the other one is Borongan?
Borongan, yes.
Borongan. When those were impacted by the Typhoon Yolanda, how many Catholic parishes were really impacted? Were there churches themselves that would just obliterate?
Oh, terrible. The churches, big parish churches, I can count them about 60 to 70 big churches.
Really?
And then chapels, village chapels will go in Borongan alone, the count was 250. In Palo, it will be about the same number. But the bishops decided the first 5 months not to touch that because the priority was the homes of the people, the food.
Right, the people, right.
So until now, those churches are still, have never been rebuilt.
Right, so now you're out about almost 10 months or so. Where does it stay right now? I mean, are there a lot of people who are still totally displaced?
A lot of the majority, if my statistics will serve me right, maybe about 80% are still
really
unstable. No house, no stable livelihood.
Now, if somebody was watching this particular interview, was a night, or even if they weren't a night, and they wanted to contribute money towards this project, there's a way they can do that?
Yes.
Okay.
Through the Supreme Office.
Okay, basically they could go to the Knights of Columbus website and find out how they could donate.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Good. Well, what is the future, do you think, of the Knights of Columbus in that part of the world? The Philippines, I know the Supreme Knight announced that South Korea, right? They're opening in South Korea. So do you see expansion in that part of the world still coming, that there's a lot of opportunities for the Knights of Columbus, let alone the Catholic Church?
Yeah, so much, especially at this time when we have Pope Francis. We have a new storyline, But I thought it would...
Do you think he resonates well with
I'd love to answer that because he's coming to the Philippines in January 2015.
That's
and I think this is the future of the typhoon victims, because I believe the devastation needed a rehab, not only of shelter or stomach or clothing. The bigger rehabilitation will be from faith, heart, and the mind. And people, the government and even non-government organizations is finding it very hard to restore that. We believe that becoming of the Pope is going to answer that.
Right. Well, maybe that's an answer to prayer anyway.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Monsignor. I appreciate you spending our time with us here today and talking to us about the Livelihood Project and the work of the Knights of Columbus in the Philippines. And that's Monsignor Pedro C. Catorio. And he's from the Bishops' Conference in the Philippines. He's involved with media. And, we'll be back at 6:30 with EWTN's coverage of the States Dinner. You can't miss that. It's a once-in-a-lifetime or once-a-year event. But before that, we can't miss the latest on what's happening in the world outside of Orlando. In fact, that happens to be EWTN News Nightly. I'm getting all choked up. I love that show so much. So we look for Brian, Patrick, and his whole team coming your way right now. EWTN News Nightly here on EWTN coming up next. We'll see you later, 6:30, States Dinner.